Well, we're going to try to get started today, and I know the bulb will probably not work. Let's try this again, and we'll see how long the projector lasts. And I could just start it up and shut it down occasionally if I need to. I think we went through these.
Yep.
Went through this one.
No.
No, we didn't do Plato.
No. Stop it. Apologies.
Okay. All right. Plato's Apology. So let's continue on there. By the way, I will mention once again, all the assignments are up on MyFire for this class and the other one. You know, the one about the guy with the mustache. They should all be there now. Everything is up except for the last two tests of each class. So, yeah, that took some work to get it there, but I think they're there. I think that's all working. And also, of course, you need to change your password. And you have to log into the SEU guest Wi-Fi. The other ones are shut down. And then you will get limited access until you change your password. Basically, you don't get any access. You have to go change your password. Once you've done that and agreed to everything, you should be able to use the Wi-Fi through the guest thing. And once they feel they have completed that, they will open up the other stuff. At least that's what I've heard. Also, you might, I don't know, you know, they say people might have a virus on their computer. And so if you feel like you might be at risk, I suggest you go over to the information pod. What do they call those things? Mods. I like to call it pod better. I think pod's better. Anyway, go over to their podcast, their modcast, and they will search it for you. Although if you do it this morning, you're going to have to wait in line. So I don't know. That's all I know. Okay, we were talking about classical philosophy. So let's continue on with that, shall we? Okay, we shall. Socrates, of course, is one of the main players here, the main player. Socrates and a couple of his students and those who follow him. You know, there's Plato, and then the student of Plato was Aristotle. So those three I often call the big three of Greek philosophy: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Now, Socrates did not write anything down. We don't have any writings of Socrates. So how do we know so much about him? Last time we talked about his trial, how he was forced to commit suicide. I guess, I don't know if that's suicide if you're forced to commit it. But, what's that? Assisted? I think if a guy holds a gun to my head and tells me to drink something that's going to kill me, he's not assisting me in anything other than killing me in a different way. Instead of pulling the trigger and shooting me with a bullet, he's making me drink something. You know, so I think the definition here is suicide. Suicide should be something you've decided to take your own life. If someone's forcing you into it, I don't think it's suicide anymore.
Kind of forced.
What's that?
Kind of forced to assemble his hand. It just kind of like suicide by cop.
Well, yeah, he did. You are correct that he did have one other option. His other option was to leave Athens forever. So he didn't want to do that. I mean, it'd be like forcing me to leave Lakeland forever. I just wouldn't want to do that. I'm finally just now learning my way around town. I still don't know it though, but I got lost this morning. I don't want to talk about it. I thought I turned, you know, all the roads changed their names, and then they go in different directions. You know, like I was trying to find, it was on Main Street, and so I see the sign that says turn left here for Main Street, and the next thing I know I'm on a different street, and I never turned. And I'm like going out of town. And
which Main Street? There's like three of them.
There's three main streets.
There's one right here on 92 behind it.
Yeah.
And then there's
one main street.
Downtown Lakeland.
Yeah. Two in downtown Lakeland. To me, Main Street should be one street, which is the main street. Anyway, that's for another day.
Our main street is kind of Memorial Boulevard.
Yeah, that's where I was, somewhere up in there. And then I was also in Massachusetts for a while.
That's downtown.
What's that?
That's downtown.
Downtown, yes, I was there. And then I ended up not there. But then I eventually ended up here. It's a good thing I got an early start. All right, well, let's talk about then Plato, not Plato. Plato, they've reduced Plato now to a closet. I drove by a place the other day, they called it Plato's closet. What's next? Socrates' yard sale? I don't know, just because I said, what is that? And they said, well, that's, they sell like used clothes in Plato's closet or something. Yeah, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're used clothes. And they name it after Plato. They should just, you want to sell used designer clothes, why don't you call it used designer clothes? Leave Plato out of it. Anyway, so we're not going to talk about Plato's closet other than what we just did. But one of the questions we have with him is when we look at his views, are they really his views or are they Socrates' views? And then some people have even gone the other way and have tried to argue Socrates never existed, believe it or not. Some people say Socrates didn't exist. Plato created Socrates as a literary foil, a straw man, so to speak. Right? And this does happen in philosophical writings. In other words, if I wanted to discuss even a political issue or a philosophical issue, I could create a person who is my opponent. You see? It's easy to fight that opponent because I control what he says. But in other words, I make that opponent say what it is I think the opposition says in such a way that I can discount it or repudiate it, and then we move on. See, sometimes philosophers have been known to create a kind of character to which they debate. It's like it's a debate, but it's written down, but it never really happened. Does that make any sense? It's a literary device. It's used not only in philosophy, but political things. I've heard people even do sermons that way, believe it or not, where it's like the Apostle Paul is talking to some modern preacher, and they're sort of debating, or I don't say they're arguing. But anyway, this is a rhetorical device. How's that? A rhetorical device. And so some people have tried to argue that Socrates was a character in a rhetorical device used by our buddy Plato. Some have tried to argue maybe Socrates wasn't real. I don't believe that. I think Socrates was a real individual. He taught. He just didn't write things down. But it is true that what we know about Socrates, we really know from Plato and Xenophon and a few other of his students who did write things down, and they wrote down what he said and what he taught them, that kind of thing. So one of the things that we know is that Plato will begin an academy in Athens in 387. Now, when you think about that, when we talk about Plato's academy, a lot of people, when I've taken people to Athens, they want me to show them where the building was. Well, not too many people, because most of them don't know about that or they don't care. But some of them have said, well, where is Plato's academy? It wasn't a building. Okay? Plato's academy was much like Plato's closet. It didn't really exist in physical form. They would just meet and he would teach people. So it was a philosophical school or academy that, I suppose like our internet academies, right? They don't really have a physical place. They're in the mind. Now, they would walk around and sometimes be in the marketplace and things like that. But it wasn't sort of like a university, a physical building. It was maintained for years. Now, one of the things that we know that Plato would teach, that Socrates also taught, which again, it's hard to separate their two views, is that true knowledge is equated with virtue. So, Socrates was very interested in knowledge, you learning to know. And as I told you, the Socratic method is basically asking you question after question after question after question. Why? Socrates did this in order for you to finally accept that you don't know. Because a lot of times people ask you questions, I won't say always, but a lot of times people ask you questions not because they want to learn something, but they want to tell you what they know or get across what their position is. Well, if you pay attention in class, I'm sure you'll hear that sort of thing. It's not, it's not as though, oh, I don't understand this. Can you please? Now, that has happened occasionally. But a lot of times people ask the question as a way of sort of resistance. They already know the answer. Some of you might want to be a lawyer. They say if you're going to be a good lawyer, you should never be in court and ask any question you don't know what the answer is. You're not there to find out information. You are there to trap people, to throw them in prison for the rest of their life. No, well, whatever. But no, you should know the answer. I mean, if you're asking a question and you don't know the answer, you better just pause right there, ask for a recess, or go to a different question, because you ought to already know the answer. Now, a lot of times when people ask me questions or other professors questions, they already know the answer, or they think they already know the answer. Now, one thing is true. If you already know the answers, if you already know things, you already know everything, you're not going to learn anything. I think that's what Socrates is trying to say. That the first pathway to learning, to knowledge, is admitting that you need to know, that you don't know. There's something I don't know, and so I need to know it. So I've been teaching for a while now, and every year, every school year, every fall especially, I meet a lot of people who already know everything that's in my class. And, it's sort of like, well, I don't know why they told me I got to take this class. I mean, sometimes they don't say it. Now, sometimes they do say it to me. Sometimes they don't say it to me. It's just their attitude, their posture, whatever, their question. Like, yeah, this is boring stuff. I know all this stuff. I had a guy last semester. I shouldn't say it was a guy, but it was a guy. And he, first day of class, I was saying, you need a textbook. For this class, you definitely need the textbook. And he says, well, I don't. He didn't have the textbook. He said, you have troubles finding it? No, because I'm not going to get it. I don't need the textbook. I said, well, you really do need the textbook. He said, history is easy. This is going to be easy. I don't need a textbook. Textbook costs too much money. I don't want it. Now, I won't tell you what all happened with that guy, but it didn't go that well, in my opinion. And he later on, he never did say that he should have bought the textbook. When I finally said you didn't buy the textbook, then he said, well, I tried reading it once. I borrowed it and I read it once. It didn't help. So no reason to get the textbook. So you see, if we already know everything, we got nothing to learn, right? So Socrates would try to question you and question you and question you until finally you would break down and just say, you know what? I don't know. I don't know. And then he would say, according to Plato, all right, now you're ready to learn. So in other words, a prerequisite to learning is admitting you don't know. Now, true knowledge, according to Plato, via Socrates, is virtue. We talked about earlier some of the philosophers who tried to look at primary elements and that sort of thing. What is sort of the basic nature of the universe? Does fire represent it, and water? And Aristotle, him too. But Plato and Socrates were not interested in that. What Socrates was really interested into, and by extension Plato, is how people live. Ethics. So true knowledge equals virtue. If you are virtuous, then you've really learned the knowledge you need to know. And not only that, but it's your behavior is tied to it. So it's one thing to know, I think I read this somewhere else, not in Plato. If you can know what is good is not enough. You need to do it. I think a guy named Jimmy said that. Jimmy. The book of James. Read that. It's in there. But the idea is not just enough to have the knowledge. You've got to act on it. And that's really what Socrates is talking about. True knowledge is virtue. All right, we could go on about that, but that's a key to remember, that he is interested in how people live. The other thing that, a real good source for this, an excellent source, is Plato's Republic. If you're going to read one work by Plato, I guess I'd start there. Plato's Republic. Although, it'll take you a while. You can work through it. Plato's Republic, in it, it's interesting. It's called the Republic because Plato is proposing his ideal state, ideal government and land and place. Remember, Plato is starting his academy in Athens, and Socrates was there too. I mean, this is supposed to be the home of democracy, and in many ways it is. When Plato then proposes his ideal state, is it a democracy? What kind of state does he propose? Philosopher kings. He is a kingdom. It's not a democracy. It's the rule of one. Monarchy, right? Instead of demosarchy. Not the rule of the people, it's the rule of one. A benevolent dictator, if you will. A benevolent king who's very wise and very benevolent. And of course, that'd have to be a philosopher. There's nobody else, oh, well, I just happen to be a philosopher. So, thank you. Yes, I would be an excellent choice. Thank you. And I'm very modest as well. So this is a thing. It should be a philosopher king. And I don't think you would have liked his picture. Well, maybe, I don't know, but I don't think so. His picture did not leave much personal freedom. People today seem to really like this idea that I should be able to do whatever I want, whenever I want to do it, at any time. It's 4 a.m. and I want to, have a big party, play the music really loud, dance around, okay. I'm going to do it. Or, a whole host of other things we will not mention here that people just want to do. Why? Because, well, I want to do it. I don't need any other reason. Personal freedom then was really squelched by Plato. For the good of his kingdom, his society, for ultimately the good of the people, you need to follow the leader. You need to do what the philosopher king, let's just insert Plato there for fun, and do what he says. Why? Because he's wise. He knows what's going on. He has it all figured out. So it's very interesting. It's a totalitarian state. It'd be much more akin to, like a communist dictator. People used to sort of relate it to more like the Soviet Union than the United States during the Cold War. They probably don't use that imagery anymore, but that's what the people used to say. Because it's very totalitarian, very dictatorial, very regulated. For example, your children, you would not raise your children. The state would raise the children. Your children would be taken from you at a very young age. Much more like Sparta, where the children there, once they'd sort of been weaned and I guess maybe house trained, as we use that of pets. Well, what do they call it? Potty trained. Oh, that's it. Okay, potty. Sorry. Same idea. once that kind of had happened, we're 5, 6 years old, 7. Then they would, the males would go into a barracks kind of situation, and would be raised by the state for the purposes of the state, because the state is in charge. All right, well, you can contemplate that. But in book 5 of, I'm going to try to start this up so that maybe you can see this, but I'm not going to. Okay. Because I'd like you to see this next picture. If not, you can see it online, assuming all the Wi-Fi issues get solved. But in book 5 of the Republic, Plato has his probably most famous illustration that is often used, often recited, to help understand what he's thinking. Anybody happen to know what that is? It's in a lot of textbooks. Well, it does. Yes, allegory of the cave. That's exactly it. Yes, the theory of forms and ideal situation. For Plato, and probably for Socrates, this world was illusionary. Yes?
Isn't the theory of the cave, we men live in a cave and all they saw was a shadow below? And one left the cave and came back and told him, and they thought he was crazy.
Yes, you're on the right track. That's exact. That is it. It's people in a cave, and one of them leaves, and when he comes back, they don't believe him. Spoiler alert: they end up killing him. Don't tell anybody. That's just, you don't want to know. That's, you don't want to read until you get to the end. Book 5, you'll find that out. Okay. All right. Now it says it's going to work. So let's see. Yes. Let me go to this next thing while it's working. Okay, while the projector's working. I've got a couple of images of this. Notice you've got the fire, you've got the diffused light, you've got the way out, and you've got the people tied up. They're all facing forward at a light source behind them, a shadow up on the screen. Wait a minute, it's kind of like this classroom. And then there's a pathway. I've got another image here. A pathway, a roadway, where they basically take things and project it up here and tell you this is a bunny. Around here we got these alligators. You know, and let's go to the next one. I got another picture of it here. Maybe, you know, these are all basically trying to represent the same thing. So they would pass the object in front of the light, and then when it got there, then you could see it up on the wall of the cave. So what you were seeing were shadows. So you're taking something that's three-dimensional, and you're seeing it as two-dimensional. All right? Now, this becomes the way to understand that the prisoners who are tied up down here, this is all they can see. So this is their reality. They've never been out of this cave. And here's the fire source, and here are the shadows. And so they see this is all that there is to reality. All right, so all these are just 3 different illustrations that I found. Since I'm not a very good artist, I just using theirs. All right? So the idea here, and I'll put this up now while we can. The idea here is that true reality forms the ideal world, not the visible world. Now, if you understand that statement, then we can move on. But I probably should pause. All right? Like a lot of statements, we say them, and if people understand them and kind of agree with them, then we can all understand it. But so the idea is, let's take this classroom as our example. We've got the projector, which sometimes works. It shows the light up on the wall, two-dimensional, and I show you the world, the Greek world, that way. And I tell you that's the Greek world, right? And so you were locked in here as a prisoner in my class. And this is our cave, because there are no windows in this room. So we can't see out. I could tell you, if this is the room, you had to stay in here all the time, that this was it. This is the world. This cave, this room. This is all there is to the world. And now let me tell you what things are. Here's a rabbit. Here's a dog. Here's a chair. Here's a tree. And I parade that in front of the light source, which you can't see it because you're tied looking straight forward. And we parade it across the screen. And so, yes, you come to be able to recognize all those things. If I gave you a quiz later and say, okay, what's this? Well, that's a bunny rabbit. That's a dog. That's a tree. That's a chair. And so you just come to accept that this is the world. The world is this big. These are the things in the world. This is the way they look. This is reality. So reality then, for you in that situation, Plato is saying is not the real reality. I guess we want to use that. The reality that we have is not the actual reality. You're not seeing the actual tree, dog, or whatever, right? Now, what happens in the story, as we know, is that one of these guys who's tied up here, where did he go? Yeah, he escapes. His bindings come loose, and he sees some kind of light here, and he heads out a path, and it actually takes him up and out of the cave, onto the ground, into the daylight. And you know, of course, he's shocked by this because he's never been there, and it's very bright. And now he sees something. What is that? And it sort of looks like a tree, but it's so much different. I can touch it. It has 3 dimensions. What is 3 dimensions? You know, it's very different. So it's all very confusing. But then, you know, being the kind of explorer and intellect that he was, he wandered around and he figured out that what had happened was that they had been just showing them the shadows of what is real, not what is real. So what everybody thought was real was not real. It was the shadows of what was real. And up here is reality. Here's a real tree. Here's a real bunny rabbit. Here's a real dog, etc. Okay? So being the nice guy, even though he really liked it up there, he thought about his friends who were tied up back in the cave. And so he comes back down into the darkness, back down into the cave. He then talks to his friends here, and you know, he's going to loosen their bindings. He said, "Come with me. I'll show you that what you're seeing here is not real." They argue with him. "No, this is real. What do you mean this isn't real? You're crazy. What's the matter with you?" And then he just kept insisting, "No, you need to follow me. You need to come. This is not real." And finally, they got so angry that they killed him. Okay, they put him to death, and they stayed in the cave. And they didn't want to go to the light. They didn't want to go up to the surface. All right? So, Plato basically is using the guy who escapes here is Socrates. Socrates goes up, sees this. He comes back to Athens, back to earth. He tries to explain to the Greeks what reality is. They wouldn't accept it, and they finally put him to death. Okay, that's sort of a very thinly veiled allegory that way. But what it also teaches us is their view of reality. By they, I mean Socrates and Plato. That this world that we live in is illusory. It's illusion. It's not real. So we see this table, and we say, that's a table. Plato would say that has the likeness of tableness, but it is not a table. The real table is out there. So there are forms. The forms of the table is here, but real tableness is on a different plane. Okay? So it's good that he gave us this cave illustration. Otherwise, maybe this stuff wouldn't make any sense at all. I'm not still sure everybody is going to agree with this, but I'm just saying that's what he's saying. So this chair, it's not the essence of chair, of what a chair is. Same with your dog, Fido. Remember, your password is Fido in capital letters, Fido in small letters. Fido's age, 23, and then an exclamation point. That will be your new password, and that will work for you. You'll be able to get on the internet. Well, if that's what you change it to. But remember, Fido, may seem like a real dog to you. Just like Lulu does to me. But, in essence, it's just a reflection of dogness. Dogness, the essence of being a canine. I don't know, a canineness. Anyway, all right. So does that make sense? That makes sense? Well, at least as much as can. So this is critical to Plato's thinking, which of course is, he says he gets it from Socrates, and I believe him. And so this then influences all the other things that he will do. Let's see where we are next. Okay, we're going to Aristotle now. Oh, it left. Well, it lasted just long enough. And I'll have to shut it down. And we'll start it up again when I get to some pictures. So let me go ahead and shut it down now because it takes it a while to shut down. Aristotle. So we're talking about just the big three. Socrates, we have no writings from him. Plato, Xenophon, and others tell us about what he taught. His ideas of ethics, his idea of putting things into practice, his idea of forms and shadows and so forth. Those are key critical things. Then we go to Aristotle. Aristotle was not a student of Socrates. He was a student of Plato. I think I would call him a student of Plato, not a disciple of Plato, because he did not really agree with Plato on a lot of stuff. Okay? Sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes a student rejects the teacher or the ideas of the teacher, right? Plato then was in this realm of, it's kind of ethereal, right? It's like nothing here is real. The table's not real. The tree's not real. These are just reflections. They're just shadows. Aristotle rejected all of that. He did. I don't know if they had the word back then. He probably would have said it was malarkey. You heard that term? Malarkey. Or as we used to say back in Indiana, hogwash. And you probably don't say that down here in Florida. We don't have too many hogs down here. Gator wash. Anyway. So, not accepting it. Why? Because he wanted to look at what was here. It's complete difference. Plato says, don't focus on what's here. Look at what's up there somewhere in the real reality, which is not here. Aristotle says, we must look at what's here. We must examine what's here to find out what the world is really like. So, whereas Plato would use deductive reasoning, Aristotle uses inductive reasoning. What is deductive reasoning? Anybody know? What's that? One point leads to another. Deduct the other. You got something to add? Yeah.
Going from general truths
Yes.
to particulars.
Okay. Both these ideas are correct. Yes. So in other words, and I think, for what it's worth, I think we need to use both deduction and induction. I don't think we should rely on just one or the other. I don't think it's an either or, I guess is what I'm saying. However, for Plato, it's pretty much always deductive, certainly when it comes to philosophy. So general principles, just take this idea and then you have well, how about this? How many here have taken geometry? I know everybody here loves math. Yeah, I see the looks on. Oh, I see the looks on your face. Some of you are not geometry fans, but in geometry, at least back in the super dark ages when I took it, we had things that were called proofs. Did you ever do a proof? And there we used deduction. If A equals B and so forth, then here. So, for example, you use a syllogism, is what it's called. Let me use one for you here. Our first premise is this: all professors are evil. That's our point one. All professors are evil. Point two: Dr. Wineland is a professor. Therefore, ergo, yes, and if A and B are correct, then C is absolutely correct. If all professors are evil, and if Dr. Wineland is a professor, then it absolutely has to be that Dr. Wineland is evil. Okay?
That's a grammar Nazi first nightmare.
If then. If A and B are correct, then C is absolutely, definitely correct by deduction. Okay? Now, induction is what? What's inductive reasoning? Yeah.
The other way around. So you would try to ascertain that Dr. Wineland is evil. And if you collect enough evidence that different professors are evil, you can make a general statement saying
Okay.
that all professors are evil.
Yeah, somehow we would have to devise an evilness quotient. Some kind of a test, some sort of thing. We'd have to somehow observe, determine what's evil behavior, I guess, and then measure it, right? And we'll say, okay, we looked at 100 professors and we measured their evilness. We looked at 100 normal people. We measured their evilness. We found out that professors are 85% more evil than regular normal people.
Wouldn't you have to make a question for one?
Well, of course. Therefore, Dr. Wineland's a professor. It's 85% more likely he's evil than a regular person you would meet, right? So in other words, induction does not give you an absolute answer. It gives you a percentage. It gives you a... This is why OJ's was walking free. Now he got arrested for something else. Is because, I remember when that case first came out, it was a long time ago. The first thing they started off with is we found these people's blood. We didn't have to use OJ, use any murder. We got this blood. We got a weapon with blood. We got a car, just happens to be a Bronco, with blood. And we got blood at the house of the assailant. And it all matches the blood of the people. I remember I heard that opening thing because it was on television. It was kind of new back then. As I'm watching it, I'm thinking, well, this is like simple, right? It's really simple. You got the dead people. They're definitely dead. You got their blood on not only this person's items, the car, at their house, so on. You got the shoe prints with the Bruno Mali size 13, of which, they went through all this stuff. It was unbelievable. And they determined that there was only really like 2 stores in California that sold that size shoe, and of course OJ had bought some there. So I just thought, well, this is going to be simple. This should be over quickly. No, it was not simple. And in the end, what did they say? They even said that his blood was found at the crime scene, and the other blood was found at his house. So what did they say? For example, they say, well, how can we be sure that's his blood? They said, well, we're sure it's his blood 98 point some, I forgot what it was. It was like 98, 99%. And so then if you take all the people in the world and you say, well, 1% of all the people in the world is a lot of people, that it might not be him. So in other words, you couldn't say absolutely that was his blood, is what they're saying. Even if it's 99% accurate that it's his blood, it's not 100%. So that's inductive. Inductive reasoning is never going to give you an absolute answer. Deductive reasoning will. I think those are the 2 differences. I mean, there's many others, but I think those are important distinctions to make. Right? Whew, yeah, inductive and deductive. So, I think deduction works pretty well. For example, when we're dealing with religious things, God is good. God created human beings, therefore human beings are good. Otherwise, where do we get the idea people are good? You're just going to try to measure what they do. then inherently they're not good or bad. It's just a summary of what you do. Well, anyway. So I think deduction does work. Certainly works for Sherlock Holmes. And it can work. Deduction can work. Induction can also work. So Aristotle was very interested in dissecting animals, in examining everything. He even wanted to dissect people. I think maybe secretly he might have, but that was strictly forbidden in Greek culture. You know, a dead body was sacred and you were not to touch it. But he wanted to examine. He wanted to see what's inside. We know we're breathing. How does that work? We know that, you know, that there's blood in there when we cut ourselves, and sometimes it squirts out. What's doing that? Right? He wanted to study all those things. So he used inductive reasoning. He was a student of Plato, but not the disciple. In fact, he's famously the tutor of Alexander the Great, which maybe is his greatest legacy. I don't know. But at any rate, he shapes the thinking of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great will always, I think, be remembering what Aristotle had taught him. This is part of his desire to just keep going and conquering, because he thought he could go to the end of the world. And he got a little disappointed when he found out it was a lot bigger than he thought. But he looked at observed facts. He studied the physical world. He even dissected animals. He also taught, if we want to think about it in sort of a more moral way, what is called the golden mean. What is the golden mean? Yeah.
You couldn't be extreme in any virtue or vice that you find in the middle ground.
Yes.
If you went too far in any direction, even a virtuous direction, it would turn.
Right. Yes. I think that's a good way to put it. That the golden mean means nothing in excess. There's so much that there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Right? Certainly too much of a bad thing. So he's saying that you should do all things in moderation. Now, that doesn't fit very well here in America because, you know, if one scoop of ice cream is good, then two has got to be twice as good. Three has got to be 3 times as good. And a whole gallon has got to be better, right? Well, Aristotle would say nothing in excess. Yes, 1 scoop of ice cream. He would have to agree. He never had ice cream, unfortunately for him. Is good. I think he would say that's good. But don't eat too much of it. Just like anything, we have to watch it in moderation. All things. Now, I am going to try to get this projector fixed by next time, because I do have some pictures I want to show you next time. Talk a little bit about art and architecture. It should be nice to be able to illustrate that. And we do meet on Friday, so keep that in mind. All the assignments are up, and I guess we'll end it there since we're basically a couple of minutes from the end anyway.